There has always been a struggle in Middle-earth of good against evil, and there has always been the will of the Valar to help the peoples of Middle-earth in their struggle against the dark powers. And there have always been guardians sent by the Valar to help those free peoples in their struggles. We have all heard of the Istari, the wizards, Gandalf, Saruman, Alatar and Pallando, and Radagast. All great, wise sorcerers who had their own specialities and personalities, and who came to Middle-earth in the Third Age to aid against Sauron. But their duty is much older. In the days before the sun, when Arda was illuminated by the Two Trees of Valinor, there had also been a group of 5 guardians, led by Melian as sixth, and sent by the Valar to guard the Firstborn elves at Cuiviénen. And the chief among the 5, with the fall of Melian, would, in his later return to Middle-earth, take her role as chief of the guardians, and be once again the greatest ally of the free peoples in their fight against Sauron. He was the closest friend and guardian of Elves and Men from the moment of their first awakening, and his name in the Mannish tongues was Saruman. Welcome, Meldonyar. I am happy to see so many new faces here. I hope to see more of you next time, when we will move on from this servant of evil to look at the tools of evil, to the dreaded weapons that could enslave the souls of their victims, the dreaded Morgul blades. So be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be reminded when the next chapter starts. But this week we ask ourselves, why did Saruman betray his friends and brethren and turn to evil? Yes, it was indeed the very same Saruman who was that great friend and ally to the Firstborn elves at Cuiviénen. And despite of what he later became, even when he returned to Middle-earth in the Third Age of the Sun, he was still that beacon of light in dark times, marked by wisdom and kindness. He was what Gandalf would later become, to such an extent that Gandalf himself goes one step further.
"Yes, I am white now," said Gandalf. "Indeed, I am Saruman, one might almost say. Saruman as he should have been."
It was not, then, a single misstep that brought such a tragic fall to this great friend of good, but a whole series of events, of wrong decisions in the wrong places at the wrong times. Over time, these little steps degraded him, and turned him into the hateful, mean creature he was in the War of the Ring, although the first of these small failures happened far back in time, beginning over 2,000 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings. As we all know, Saruman, just like Gandalf and the other Istari, was not mortal. He was in fact a being similar to Sauron, a Maya, a divine spirit and one whose task it was to watch over the world and its inhabitants. Sent by the Valar, the highest and most powerful of the divine spirits, the Istari was sent to Middle-earth as supporters and advisors of the free peoples as Sauron's threats grew, and defeating him seemed all but impossible. In order to gain the trust of the free peoples and not to intimidate them, the wizards took the forms of old men from then on. However, with this, their grandeur and once vast knowledge were diminished. This was done for a reason though, for it was in no way their purpose to bring down Sauron themselves and break his power with their own, or for that matter, use their power to actively lead the peoples of Middle-earth. Rather than fighting at the forefront, they should act as advisors and teachers in the background, inspiring hope and uniting Sauron's enemies under the banner of the West. However, because they lost much of their former strength and walked in mortal bodies, they were also more susceptible to the weaknesses of those human forms. Although ultimately the wizards all received the same main purpose, they were fundamentally different from one another. For example, while Gandalf had a kind, compassionate and humble nature, and was particularly close to men and hobbits, Saruman was more proud, even haughty, and leaned much more towards the elves. After his arrival in Middle-earth, Saruman made many journeys to the far east of Middle-earth, though his aims and deeds at that time were not recorded in any book and remained a mystery even after his death. After centuries of adventures in the east, Saruman finally returned to the Westlands, and when the White Council was formed in 2463, the White Wizard was elected its leader. An election that later proved disastrous, as, with hindsight, it clearly played into Sauron's hands. Galadriel, who was also on the council, originally proposed Gandalf as leader, and so it would have been had not Gandalf, much to his own character and personal weakness, declined. This mere suggestion, however, struck Saruman in his pride, as he saw himself as the chief of the wizards, and therefore naturally coming before Gandalf in eligibility. Despite being considered allies, Saruman increasingly saw Gandalf as a competitor, not least because Narya, the mighty elven ring of fire, was given to Gandalf when the wizards arrived in Middle-earth. Even then, Gandalf was envisioned as having a special role, not Saruman, which increasingly angered the White Wizard. As time went on, it thus became increasingly clear that Gandalf possessed greater inner strength and exerted more influence over the peoples of Middle-earth, although he only held second place on the White Council. Moments like this grew the jealousy within Saruman, rooting itself deeper and deeper as the years passed. Jealousy turned into envy, envy turned into greed, and so Saruman began to consume himself in anger and hatred in pursuit of power. Teaching and guiding men and elves began to bore him. Instead, in defiance of all his previous commands, he started to manipulate them with the power of his voice, and when words were not enough, he resorted to more drastic means. When the Steward of Gondor made Saruman the Warden of the Tower of Orthanc in Isengard, some 300 years after the founding of the White Council, he was still the friend and ally of Gondor. And though this gift at first was made with goodness in mind, it gave Saruman a place to call his own. It gave the wise wizard a place away from others to study and to deepen his knowledge. But it also secluded him and decreased his connections to the peoples around him who had previously helped him bind himself to his original purpose. In the depths of Isengard, his dark thoughts were given more chance to root, and though outwardly he remained Saruman as he had always been, inside the tethers to his purpose were withering away. His focus shifted to the study of evil and to blacksmithing. Indeed, before his arrival in Middle-earth, Saruman had been a servant of Aule, the smith of the Valar. Thus he was already skilled in these crafts and was naturally fascinated by the rings of power and the work of Sauron, who had also served Aule in long-forgotten times. Exploring ancient writings that would have been better left unread, Saruman became even more lost in the alluring arts of evil, until he came to admire Sauron, his one-time nemesis, and looked to him as a role model, though he never did admit it to himself. He wanted to become a ringsmith, and at last managed to imitate on a small scale what the Dark Lord had done in big. He created his own ring, which he wore from then on, as he declared himself no longer Saruman the White, but Saruman of many colors. What powers and abilities were inherent in this ring remains unknown, for much of the art of ring making was lost. Yet it was certainly of equal strength to the lesser rings of power. However, he desired the one ring for himself alone. As the new Lord of the Rings, he convinced himself, his aim was to supplant Sauron and rule Middle-earth and its inhabitants himself. So he sent scouts to shadow Gandalf and the Shire, and kept his servants searching for Sauron's jewel. In order to increase his chances of finding the Master Ring, he tried to convince the wise that the One Ring had been washed into the sea, although of course he did not know its true whereabouts. At the same time, however, he himself searched meticulously for the ancient artifact. In addition, he delayed the attack on Dol Guldur, hoping that if Sauron was allowed to search for it unhindered, the ring would reveal itself. And when Sauron was finally driven out of his lesser stronghold, Saruman withdrew to Isengard for good. From then on, it was only a matter of time before he made his final, crucial mistake. His flaws unchecked, he became overbearing, arrogant and self-absorbed, and in the year 3000 of the Third Age, he finally committed that final act that would doom him. He ventured to look into the Palantir of Isengard. Thus he fell into the final trap of Sauron, who had possessed the Seeing Stone of Minas Morgul, and immediately began to ensnare the haughty Saruman with flattering words, and gave him the admiration he so desperately desired. While the White Wizard never worshipped the Dark Lord, and never consciously acted on behalf of Mordor, unconsciously he carried out every thought that Sauron planted in his mind, through the power of beautiful words. He became a traitor to the White Council, and in the end, in Isengard arose a second evil power among the free peoples of Middle-earth. Thus, the War of the Ring could have reached devastating proportions, and the journey of the Fellowship could have failed if Saruman had stayed true to his new master. But, as is so often the case, in the end he only had his own interests in mind, and became a traitor twice over. He misled the Nazgul when they asked him about the Shire, and when the hobbits Merry and Pippin were captured, the embassies of Isengard and Mordor quarrelled over where the halflings should go, until the uruk-hai of the White Hand finally prevailed and, without realizing it, averted complete catastrophe. Actions like these and Saruman's evil path ultimately resulted in a surprising twist. Evil was weakened by evil, benefiting the forces of good and aiding in the ultimate success of the Fellowship of the Ring. So, in some way, all of Saruman's evil had done some good after all. Despite this, he was never to be forgiven for his evil deeds, and after his mortal body was killed, his immortal spirit was banished from his original home, the blessed lands of Valinor, and was cursed to forever dwell in the lands of Middle-earth as a disempowered shadow. Thus we conclude this chapter and this video. Did the knowledge surprise you? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed it and would like to learn more of the inner workings of Arda, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified of the next chapter in the mysteries of Westerness, and learn of blades so evil they would not merely kill, but enslave the very souls of their victims the dreaded Morgul blades that almost turned Frodo into one of the ringwraiths. I have been Irjikor Cuiviénen, and I wish you all Namarie Meldonyar.